She cheated with my best friend's brother, stole $250, $0 from our joint account, and now my ex is suing me for half our house. None of this made sense until I discovered the betrayal was just the beginning. I never thought I'd be the guy writing about how I found out my wife was cheating on me, especially not in a way that involves stolen money, lies, and a betrayal that turned my whole world upside down. But here I am, laying it all out because I know there are guys out there who might be going through something similar, and maybe hearing my story will help them see the warning signs before it's too late. It started about 6 months ago. Things with Sarah seemed normal enough, or at least that's what I told myself. She was a little more irritable than usual, snapping at me over small things, but I figured she was just stressed with work or whatever. She's a high-powered marketing exec, always busy, always on her phone, but she's also the kind of woman who loves to throw around her "I'm too busy" excuse whenever she's hiding something. Still, I never suspected anything outright. I trusted her, or at least I wanted to. Then little things started changing. She'd leave her phone around more often, hiding it when I entered the room, and her attitude towards me became colder, more dismissive. She'd go out with the girls but come back late, smelling like perfume I didn't recognize, and her excuses were flimsy. She'd say she was just having drinks with friends, but I'd catch her in tiny lies, like she'd say she was home alone when I'd see her texting someone under the table. I brushed it off at first, convincing myself that maybe I was just paranoid or imagining things. One night I decided to check her phone. I'd never done that before, but something felt off. I figured if she was hiding something, I had a right to know. I unlocked her phone while she was in the shower. Nothing malicious, just curiosity, I told myself. That's when I saw the messages. It wasn't just innocent flirting, it was explicit. She was sleeping with her boss, Mark, and they'd been doing it for months. The texts were full of promises, dirty talk, and plans for secret meetings. I saw photos of her in his bed, her half-naked, smiling like she was the happiest woman alive. My stomach dropped. I felt like my heart had been punched in the gut. I couldn't breathe for a second. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. How had I missed all the signs? I thought I knew her, but it was like discovering she'd been living a lie right under my nose. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and furious all at once. I wanted to scream, to break something, but I just sat there staring at that screen, trying to process what I'd just seen. The next day I confronted her. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I showed her the messages, the photos, everything. She looked surprised at first, then her face twisted into this bitchy, defensive sneer. She told me I was crazy, that I was paranoid, that I'd misunderstood. She called me jealous, insecure, and said I was overreacting. She even had the nerve to accuse me of snooping and invading her privacy. I told her I wasn't blind, that I'd seen enough, and that I wanted the truth. That's when she started lying, saying it was just sex, that it didn't mean anything, that Mark was just a mistake, and that I was overreacting because I was paranoid about losing her. But I knew better. I could see it in her eyes, the guilt, the shame, the coldness. She was lying, trying to spin her way out of it. Still, I wanted to believe her at first. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just a one-time thing. But deep down, I knew I'd uncovered something far worse. This wasn't just about cheating. It was about betrayal on a level I'd never imagined. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything, trying to understand how everything fell apart so quickly. I felt like a fool for trusting her, for thinking we had some kind of future. I was furious at her for lying, at myself for not seeing it sooner, and at Mark for being the scumbag who took her away from me. I kept asking myself how she could do this, how she could betray me so openly, so shamelessly. The money was another piece of the puzzle I hadn't fully grasped yet, but I could feel it lurking beneath the surface. Something about all that stolen cash, that joint account, that secret bank transfer she'd made. It didn't add up, and I knew I'd have to dig deeper. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy to get cheated on, let alone find out through some hidden messages and a stolen glance at her phone. But now I was in this mess, and I could feel the whole foundation of my life cracking. I had no idea what was coming next, but I knew one thing for sure. This betrayal was just the beginning. After I saw those messages, everything changed. I couldn't just pretend I didn't see them, couldn't go back to pretending our life was normal. That night, I stayed up staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out my next move. The betrayal was like a punch to the stomach, and honestly, I felt numb. I kept thinking about the money, how she had access to our joint account, how she could have taken hundreds of thousands of dollars without me noticing right away. It was almost like she was planning her escape from the very beginning. The next morning, I decided I needed to get some facts straight. I pulled out our bank statements, looked over every transaction. Sure enough, there was a transfer of $250, $0 just a few weeks ago. It was hidden in a series of small deposits, but I traced every last one. I remembered how she'd been acting secretive about money lately, avoiding questions, saying we were fine financially. But now I saw the truth. She'd been planning her escape, maybe even with Mark or someone else. I didn't know yet. All I knew was she'd stolen that money from us, and I was furious. I needed proof, so I hired a private investigator. I wanted to know if she was really just sleeping with Mark or if there was more. It didn't take long. The pie came back with photos and videos. Turns out she'd been seeing Mark for almost a year, using some fancy hotel room downtown. They'd meet late at night, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. I also found out she'd been funneling money to Mark's account, probably from that stolen cash. It was a mess, and I felt like I was losing my mind. How could she do this to me, to us? While all this was happening, she was still lying. She told me she loved me, that it was just sex with Mark and that she'd stop. But I knew better. I could see it in her eyes. She was lying through her teeth. She'd already moved money out of our joint account, trying to cover her tracks. I found emails where she was talking about getting out and starting fresh, and I realized she'd been planning her escape for months. I felt so betrayed, so humiliated. I'd given her everything, and she'd been sneaking around behind my back the entire time. That's when I decided I couldn't stay silent anymore. I told her I knew everything. She started crying, begging me to forgive her, saying she was confused, that she didn't mean for it to get this far. She threw in every excuse in the book. She was stressed, she was lonely, she was bored. And she kept insisting that she loved me, that she was just caught up in some stupid affair. But I wasn't buying it. I saw her for what she was, a liar, a thief, and someone who was willing to destroy everything we built for a moment of selfish pleasure. The emotional toll hit me hard. I felt angry, yes, but also heartbroken. I'd always believed in her, in us. Now I was questioning every memory, every moment we'd shared. How many times had she lied to my face? How many little things had I missed? And what about the money? I started to realize that the theft was just part of a bigger picture. She'd been planning her escape, probably planning to run away with Mark or whoever else she'd been seeing. She, stolen from us, lied to me, and now she was trying to manipulate the situation. I remember sitting in my office that day, staring at the documents, feeling like I'd been hit by a freight train. I was angry at her, at Mark, but mostly at myself for not seeing it earlier. I kept asking myself how I'd missed the signs, how I'd been so blind. I'd always been the trusting type, maybe too trusting. But now I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just let her walk away with everything, including the money she stole. In that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let her take everything without a fight. I started looking into legal options, thinking about how I could protect what was mine: the house, the money, my reputation. I knew I had to act fast before she managed to drain everything or disappear entirely. I also realized I needed to prepare myself emotionally. This wasn't just about money or cheating. It was about my dignity, my future, and how I was going to rebuild after this betrayal. That part of the story is just beginning, but I'll tell you this: things are never as simple as they seem. Betrayal opens up a whole can of worms, and I'm just starting to see how deep the rabbit hole goes. I honestly don't know what the future holds, but I do know this: I'm done being the victim. It's time to fight back, and I'm not going down without a fight. After I gathered enough evidence, I knew I had to act fast. The betrayal had gone beyond just emotional pain. She had stolen $250,000 from our joint account, and honestly, I wasn't sure if she was planning to disappear with Mark or someone else entirely. The shock of all this was still fresh, But I couldn't afford to let my emotions control me now. I to be smart, strategic. That's when I started planning my next move, legal, financial, and personal. I spoke with a lawyer the next day. I wanted to protect what was mine, especially that house we bought together. I also wanted to understand what my rights were given the circumstances. The lawyer was straightforward. She told me that since we're still legally married, I could file for divorce, and I might have a case for the stolen money if I could prove she took it without my consent. It was a messy situation, but I was ready to fight for it. Meanwhile, I also contacted the bank and froze our joint account. I didn't trust her one bit anymore. I also changed all the passwords on our online banking, email, and her phone. I knew she'd try to hide her tracks, so I had to stay one step ahead. That's when I found out she'd already transferred some money to her sister's account, trying to cover her tracks. It was clear she was panicking, trying to clean up the mess she'd made. In the midst of all this chaos, I remembered her bitchy attitude when I confronted her. She'd lied so many times, acted like she was the victim. I realized she'd always been manipulative, even before all this happened. She'd make me feel guilty for asking questions about money, accuse me of being paranoid, call me insecure. It was classic gaslighting. But now I saw her for what she really was, a con artist in her own right, hiding her tracks behind a mask of innocence. I also started digging into her recent expenses. That's when I found out she'd been spending like crazy. Designer clothes, fancy dinners, even a luxury spa retreat last month. All paid for with stolen money. It made me sick. She was living her best life while I was left picking up the pieces. I couldn't believe how selfish she'd been, how far she was willing to go just to run away with her lover and my money. What made everything worse was that she kept denying everything. She kept telling me she loved me, that she'd never cheat, that she'd never steal from us. But her actions said otherwise. I realized she'd been lying to my face for months, maybe longer. The emotional toll was brutal. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and angry, so angry that I wanted to confront her again and demand answers. But I knew I couldn't do that without legal backup. I had to be careful. I started documenting everything, screenshots, bank statements, emails, even her text messages with Mark. I wanted to build a solid case. I also reached out to some friends, asking if they'd seen anything unusual. Honestly, I was trying to piece together how deep this conspiracy went. Then there was the house. She was suing me for half of it, claiming we owned it jointly. I knew she was trying to get her hands on my share, maybe to cover her debts or to disappear with her lover. I had to prepare for that too. I started looking into property laws, how to defend my ownership. I wasn't going down without a fight. This was personal now. I also had a moment of clarity. I realized I'd been naive to trust her so blindly. She'd been lying to me for months, maybe longer. The woman I thought I knew was just a shell, someone who'd betrayed me in every way possible. I started questioning everything about our marriage, about who she really was. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but I knew I had to accept it if I was going to move forward. The emotional was relentless. One day I'd be furious, the next day devastated, but I kept telling myself I had to stay strong. I couldn't let her win. I had to take back control of my life, my money, my house. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. I deserved that much. As I sat there going through all the evidence, I knew this was only the beginning. There was so much more coming, and frankly, I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. But I couldn't turn back now. And that's where I am, standing in the wreckage of what I thought was my life, trying to figure out how to rebuild from this chaos. The betrayal was just the surface. There's a lot more beneath, and I'm determined to find out everything. By this point, I'd gathered a mountain of evidence: bank statements, emails, texts, photos, and even some recordings I managed to secretly capture. It was a sickening realization that she'd been planning this for months, maybe even longer. She stolen $250,000, lied to my face, and now she was trying to squeeze me out of my own house. Every step felt like walking through a minefield, but I knew I had to stay focused if I wanted to come out of this with what was rightfully mine. I decided I needed to confront her again, but this time with everything laid out in front of her. I wanted her to see that I wasn't going to be played anymore. I arranged a meeting at a neutral place. her favorite coffee shop of all places. I told her I had some questions, that I needed honesty. When she arrived, she was her usual bitchy self, defensive, dismissive, and full of lies. She tried to deny everything, saying she was confused, that she didn't mean for any of this to happen. She claimed she was just stressed and lonely, and that Mark was just a distraction, not some evil mastermind behind her betrayal. But I didn't buy it. I laid out every piece of evidence I had, showed her the bank transfers, the emails, the photos of her with Mark. Her face twisted in anger and frustration. She kept trying to spin her lies, saying I was paranoid, that I was accusing her of things she hadn't done. She even had the nerve to say I was controlling, that I never trusted her. That was the moment I realized how manipulative she'd become. She was gaslighting me, trying to make me doubt my own perceptions. I looked her straight in the eyes and told her I knew she'd been stealing from us, that she'd been cheating, and that I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I told her she was a liar, a thief, and she'd ruined everything we built. I also warned her that I was going to take legal action, that she'd be held accountable for her actions. I saw her panic for a brief second, but then she quickly masked it with that bitchy smirk. She said she loved me, that she'd never do anything to hurt me, that it was all a mistake. But I knew better. I saw through her lies. That confrontation was a turning point. I felt a surge of anger and resolve. I knew I couldn't let her manipulate me anymore. I had to take control of the situation. I contacted my lawyer again, told her to prepare the paperwork for divorce and to start the process of recovering the stolen money. I also talked to the bank and the authorities about the theft. I was determined to get every penny back, even if it meant going to court. Meanwhile, she kept trying to play the victim, crying, pleading, begging me not to ruin her life. She said she'd do anything to make it right, that she'd leave Mark, that she'd give back every dollar if I just forgave her. But I knew she was lying. She'd already burned that bridge. I didn't trust her anymore, and I wasn't about to be manipulated into staying with someone who'd betrayed me so completely. The emotional toll was brutal. I felt betrayed, angry, and exhausted. But I also felt a strange sense of clarity, like I was finally waking up from a nightmare I'd been living in for too long. I realized I'd been naive, trusting her blindly. She'd been lying to me for months, maybe longer. The woman I thought I knew was just a facade, someone who'd betrayed me in every way possible. I had to accept the reality, no matter how painful it was. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the empty walls, thinking about everything I'd uncovered. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to jump into the unknown. I knew I had to let go of her, of the life I thought we had. It was time to rebuild, to start over. I promised myself I'd never let anyone betray me like this again. Trust is hard to earn, easy to lose, and I'd lost enough. Now, it was about reclaiming what was mine and making sure she paid for what she did. Looking back, I realized that betrayal isn't just about the affair or the stolen money. It's about the shattered trust, the broken promises, and the realization that someone you loved can turn out to be your worst enemy. But I also learned that I'm stronger than I thought. I can survive this. I will survive this. And someday I'll come out of it better, wiser, more cautious, and ready to rebuild from the ashes. The legal process took longer than I expected, but I stayed steady. My lawyer filed for divorce, citing infidelity and financial misconduct, especially the theft of $250, $0. I also made it clear I intended to recover every dollar she stole, and I was prepared to go to court if necessary. Meanwhile, I kept digging into her financials, trying to find every last dollar she'd squirreled away or tried to hide. She was trying to cover her tracks, but I was one step ahead, changing passwords, freezing accounts, and tracking every suspicious transaction. Her attempts to manipulate the situation only made me more determined. She kept calling, begging me to work things out, crying that she loved me and that she'd do anything to make it right. That was her favorite line, "I love you, don't ruin everything." But I could see through that now. Love wasn't enough. Trust was broken, and she'd proven she was capable of betrayal on an unforgivable level. I told her bluntly that I didn't want to hear her lies anymore, that I was done playing her game. One day she showed up at my house unexpectedly, trying to guilt-trip me into forgiving her. She was bitchy, demanding, and full of excuses. She told me she was sorry, but her eyes said she wasn't really sorry. She insisted she'd never do it again, that it was all a mistake and that she'd make everything right if I just gave her another chance. I looked at her and thought, yeah, right. I told her she'd already crossed the line, that I wasn't going back to the way things were, and that I was going to fight for what's mine. In the meantime, I started preparing for the inevitable court battles over the house, the money, and the custody of our assets. I hired a financial forensic expert to trace every dollar. I wanted to prove she'd stolen, lied, and manipulated her way into destroying what we had. I also hired a criminal attorney to discuss possible charges related to her theft and fraud. I wasn't just after the money. I wanted her held accountable for the betrayal. The emotional toll was intense. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and angry all at once. But I also felt a strange sense of relief, like I was finally taking control of my life again. I started going to therapy, trying to process everything. I realized I'd been living in denial for too long, ignoring the signs that she was slipping away from me, emotionally and financially. I'd trusted her blindly, and now I saw that trust had been completely shattered. One night, I sat in my living room, staring at the divorce papers and the evidence I'd collected. I felt a mixture of sadness and resolve. Sadness because I'd lost the woman I thought I knew, but also resolve because I was finally taking steps to reclaim my life. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be court dates, financial disputes, and emotional battles. But I was determined to come out of this stronger, smarter, and more guarded. The worst part isn't just the betrayal itself, it's how it makes you question everything, your judgment, your trust, your own sense of stability. But I learned something crucial: I have the strength to survive this. I have the ability to rebuild, even if it's from the ashes. I can't undo what's been done, but I can control how I move forward, and I will. I have to. As I write this, I'm still in the thick of it, but I know one thing for sure: this isn't the end. It's a new beginning. A hard, painful one, but a necessary one. I don't think I'll ever fully trust again, but I do believe that I'll come out of this wiser and more cautious. And someday I'll look back on this mess and know I survived. That's what keeps me going, knowing I've got the strength to get through, no matter how messy or unfair it gets. Now, as I sit here reflecting on everything that's happened, I realize how much this whole nightmare has changed me. I used to think trust was everything, that love could conquer all. Turns out, trust is fragile, and love without honesty is just a lie. I lost a lot: my wife, $250,000, my sense of security. But I also gained clarity. I learned that betrayal can come from those you trust the most, but strength comes from how you handle it. The court cases are still ongoing, but I've managed to recover most of the stolen money. The house is in dispute, but I'm confident I'll keep my share. More importantly, I've learned not to ignore the warning signs. Those little things that seem insignificant at first but turn out to be major red flags. I'll never trust blindly again. I've become more cautious, more aware of how deception can hide behind a pretty face or a convincing smile. I've also started rebuilding myself emotionally. Therapy helped, and I've realized I don't need someone who lies and steals from me to be happy. I've cut out toxic people, learned to set boundaries, and most of all, I've rediscovered my own strength. There's a sense of liberation in knowing I survived this chaos, that I can start over, even if it's from a place of pain. To anyone reading this who might be going through something similar, just know you're not alone. Betrayal cuts deep, but it doesn't have to define you. You can come out the other side stronger. Trust is hard to earn and easy to lose, but your self-respect isn't something anyone can take away unless you let them. Be vigilant, protect yourself, and don't be afraid to fight for what's yours, whether that's your money, your dignity, or your peace of mind. I've learned that revenge isn't about getting back at someone or causing pain. It's about reclaiming your life, your power, and your peace. I may have lost a lot, but I've gained the realization that I am capable of surviving the worst. That knowledge alone is worth more than any amount of stolen cash or broken promises. So here I am, stronger, wiser, and ready to move forward. I won't forget what happened, but I won't let it define me either. I'll keep rebuilding, keep trusting myself, and keep hoping that someday I'll find a love built on honesty and respect, not lies and betrayal. That's what I want now: truth, loyalty, and a future I can believe in again.